Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a big flavored Imperial Stout from Perennial Artisan Ales. This specific beer is one of their most lauded beers, highly regarded. It sells out very quickly. I've missed it the past few years when Tavour had a stash in. I caught it this year finally. This specific beer is called Abraxas. It clocks in at 11.5% ABV. It is an Imperial Stout that's been brewed with ancho chilies, cinnamon, cacao nibs, and vanilla. Perennial Artisan Ales is based in St. Louis, Missouri. So further, this is supposed to be hovering somewhere around 80 IBUs. Now, this is not a barrel-aged beer. This is just a big, high ABV flavored Imperial Stout. So I'm expecting big things, and with this IBU number, I'm expecting a really rich, full malt bill underneath the back, which I think is going to pair well with these ingredients. So aside from just the standard Abraxas, I was lucky to get my hands on a couple different versions of this beer. They have quite a few different versions. I got a three-part bundle, so today I'm reviewing just their standard Abraxas. Yes, with these additives, that is the standard version of this beer. So, in terms of label art, it's got a really cool design. It's almost got like some kind of Mayan or Aztec looking motif to it. And it says Abraxas. Looks really neat. I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up, but it looks quite cool. This is obviously a very large bottle. There's not a chance we're getting this whole beer in this stout glass. But let's get this cracked. All right. And we're going to start pouring. I expect this to be thick and dark. Yep, and both of those thoughts would prove to be true. I'm going to be aggressive here. Give it a good chance to form a head. It's quite thick. All right. Let that head catch up to itself. I'm just going to top it off just a tick more. Okay. Oh, man. That's a very pungent aroma. Wow. That smells amazing. It's just jumping out of the glass at you. Yeah, visually, it's pitch black. I could see as I was first pouring it, and I can see it very clearly still on the side. Pretty active in terms of carbonation, but it's thick. They're taking their time to move up. Very, very, very tiny, tight carbonation, which is probably why this is forming a pretty nice, creamy head. I don't know how long that's going to stick around, just given how active the carbonation is rushing up through there, but we'll see. Let's get right up for a full, proper sniff. Wow. Wow, you can smell the roast of that malt bill. Almost has a coffee-like aroma to it. You can smell the chilies. Cinnamon's not really jumping out at me on the profile. You can smell the cinnamon and the chilies really dominantly, as well as this malt bill. Now, cacao nibs, it's going to be mixing with that malt bill, so that's another tough aroma to pick out just smelling it. But wow, big, bold, pungent aroma. You get right up on it. It smells absolutely fantastic. Oh man, this is a really nice set of ingredients here. I've had quite a few beers and brewed some with some similar ingredients, and I know that they work well in a stout. So let's just jump right in and see what all the hullabaloo is about Abraxas and see what we think. Oh man. Oh boy. Oh, that's a big beer. That's a very big beer. Just packed with flavor right away. You're hit with it. The flavor intensity is pretty incredible. Now, I kind of expected that. It's a big Imperial Stout with a lot of added ingredients. It's supposed to be sitting somewhere around 80 IBUs, so I was expecting a lot of flavor, both from the malt bill and from the added ingredients, and I can say I'm not disappointed at all. I understand why this beer is so highly regarded. And this goes in this kind of side category of some of the stouts that I've had in my life that I would say these are among the best representatives of what a flavored stout is and can and should be. This is tremendous. This is absolutely top tier. Before I even get to really scrutinize over time, break down, and make my tasting notes, this beer is absolutely delicious. It puts me in mind very much of one of my local craft brewers, Cigar City. They have a flavored Imperial Stout that they release very small batches. Even locals, you got to line up hours and hours in advance. They have a strict purchase limit on the number of bottles. It's called hunapus. And this puts me in mind of that a lot, and that is very high praise. That's easily, Cigar City Hunapus is easily the best stout I've ever had in my life. This is very much in that same kind of vein, and it's got a very similar kind of vibe and feel to it. So my first thoughts on this: huge, massively impressive beer. What does it actually put me in mind of? A little bit of kind of like the El Zacaton Hubbard's Cave stout we had several reviews back, which was kind of this Mexican-inspired, Mexican hot chocolate kind of vibe in stout form. That's very much the same vibe I'm getting out of this beer. And when that kind of type of ingredients is done in the right proportions in a good, solid, fundamental base, it just is one of the greatest flavor combinations, that I could think of even outside of a beer, but in a beer, especially a big, bold Imperial Stout, it just absolutely works. Now, what I think kind of sets this one apart from most that I've had that are kind of this similar type structure is coming back to the IBUs. And it's not really about the bitters, but like what they represent is readily apparent in this beer. So international bitterness units. It's really subjective. I mean, it's a scientific, they know what the number is, but the way that each person perceives bittering is completely different and essentially subjective. Depends on the beer, what else is with the beer, what you've had before or after it eat, all these good things. But in this one, and I expected it and I could smell it, that intensity of the roast, that's where the bittering's coming from in this. This is a big, 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 bold, deeply roasted malt bill with clearly a lot of volume in it. That naturally is bringing out not just a ton of flavor, but this nice kick of, it's got a bitter to it. It's not a sweet beer. It's just big and flavorful. So we're going to jump back in here. There was a lot to digest. I had a lot that I was thinking when I had my initial sip. Aside from the fact I love it, I'm going back in. We're going to explore body, mouthfeel, flavor development a bit more, and the finish. This is a tremendous beer. Absolutely tremendous. This is a solid medium heavy body, a very thick, a very viscous mouthfeel. Agitation around the palate really gets it super velvety, silky, creamy, and you can feel that thickness. How this flavor opens, it's almost an immediate identical boom. You're hit with just the intensity of the malt bill and a big mouthful of both cinnamon and the chilies up front. So ancho chilies, cinnamon, and the malt bill. That's the first thing you notice. As that flavor starts to blossom in its intensity over the next couple of seconds, that's when the vanilla comes in. That's when the cacao really starts to kind of bind with that intensity of the roast of the malt bill, and you start to be able to pick out all the flavors kind of independently, and then they all just kind of are blending in and out, and it really, really is just an intensity of flavor. Every one of these ingredients works with every other ingredient that's in this beer, either by itself or within a group. They could take one out, swap one in, move it around. It doesn't really matter. It just works. It's just one of these flavor combinations that works particularly well in an Imperial Stout, just due to the intensity of it, and it's absolutely fantastic. This beer in particular does something that a lot that I've had that are kind of sort of similar. This kind of, you could call it Mexican hot chocolate. That's not what they're claiming this is, but you could say it's got that similar vibe. What this one does that many of those I have had don't is it's got a bigger presence of cinnamon and it's got a bigger presence of the chilies. And I love cinnamon, and I think kind of having that as a leading ingredient pairing with that malt bill, then kind of letting the other ingredients come in after that. I don't know where the ratios are, but that to me is among the best ways to balance it, because vanilla is a very bold, pungent flavor, and cacao nibs are typically going to bind with that natural, rich, roasty edge of a malt bill anyway, as is the case in this one. So letting kind of the chilies and the roasty edge of the malt bill and the cinnamon pop first, man, it's just incredible. And it makes when these other flavors finally do kind of come in and join the party, it just keeps getting better and better as it's intensifying. It's absolutely delicious. Now, in terms of how this finishes, this is not a dry stout at all. It feels very, very wet all the way to the end. It definitely is a longer than average finish, though I would say this one is not as long as I expected it to be, considering the intensity of the flavor of the elements of this beer. It is longer than average, but it's not as long as a lot. And really where it kind of leaves in the back is there is very much a lingering cinnamon, and there's a lingering bit of that underlying malt bill. That's kind of what you're left with at the very back. That just kind of haunts on the back of the palate before it finally dissipates to nothing. But absolutely fantastic. I 100% see why people are always going on about this beer. Folks up in Missouri that have maybe a better chance of grabbing this every year, you're very lucky. This is just a well done flavored Imperial Stout. I absolutely love this. I'm going to take my time, sip on this beer, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. So again, this is Perennial Artisan Ales Abraxas, an Imperial Stout clocking in at 11.5% ABV. This one specifically brewed with ancho chilies, cinnamon, cacao nibs, and vanilla. Perennial Artisan Ales is based in St. Louis, Missouri. So starting with the aroma, as you might expect on a very high ABV flavored Imperial Stout, the aromas on this one were absolutely huge. I mean, it just jumped out at you with the glass. Everything that they put in there, you could really pick up on the nose. Vanilla, cacao nibs, cinnamon, the chilies, and it smelled absolutely fantastic. And not just the additive ingredients, but also that underlying very rich roasty malt bill. Absolutely amazing aroma on this one. Very pungent. The aroma does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste on this one was just, it's really one of those stouts that it's just so well done. You're kind of taken aback by how good it is. This really did remind me of my personal favorite stout that I've ever had. That's my local brewer, Cigar City. You probably heard of them, Hunapu's Imperial Stout. Similar kind of elements to it, and this really put me in mind of that, and that's very high praise. I mean, all of the flavors work together. They really work well in a stout, and it just was absolutely beautifully balanced in every little addition that they had. And again, that rich underlying malt bill came through perfectly clearly. Taste does get a 10 out of 10. For the body, this was a big beer, 11.5%, and it felt big. It had real presence. The body does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, again, 11.5% ABV. Big Imperial Stout. The mouthfeel was quite viscous. It was quite thick, and it felt exactly right for the style in the ABV range. Mouthfeel does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish was nice. It was longer than average, though I did actually expect it to be a little longer than it was. Certainly for the style, certainly compared to the pungency of the ingredients, I thought that it would have a little more oomph to push it out. So yes, it was longer than average, but not as long as some. Finish overall does get an 8 out of 10. For the head retention, this one did an absolutely fantastic job. Poured a very nice, thick, creamy head that stuck around the entire time. Head retention gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the appearance, this was absolutely pitch black as expected. Appearance gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was top notch. The malt bill came through clearly, absolutely delicious. The ancho chilies came through clearly, and that for me is the trickiest ingredient in them. If you've never brewed with chilies, it can be tricky because you want to extract some chili flavor and some heat, but if you get too much into the wrong part of the stage of the beer brewing process, it can start to take on these kind of funky overtones, and that did not happen. It was delicious, exactly as I imagined they intended. Cinnamon came through clearly, cacao nibs, and the vanilla. Everything had its own voice. Balance does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the feeling and the intangible, subjectively, I absolutely love this beer. It does get a 10 out of 10. And finally, as an example of the style, this is a top-notch flavored Imperial Stout. I would not honestly change a thing about it. It's about as good as it gets. Example of the style gets a perfect 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Perennial Artisan Ales Abraxas to a 98 out of 100. Folks, if you're a fan of flavored imperial stouts and any kind of imperial stouts that have these kind of similar flavor compounds, this is one of the better ones I've had to date, to be certain. This is absolutely top tier stout, absolutely delicious, and I 100% see what all the hype has been about Abraxas. Finally, 3 years later, I got my hands on a set of these beers, and my first taste of this Abraxas line, I'm absolutely blown away. If you can get your hands on this, absolutely worth it. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop on our videos, go live to YouTube. Just turn on the notifications, click that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.